Hello everybody, this is David. Welcome back to my channel. This video is the next in the series, The Christian Ethic in the 21st Century, and we are currently looking at how we should be involved with the world and our community, the world around us. And we saw in the last video that some people totally cut themselves off from the world, and some people, others, aren't even aware that there is another world to come. But for the Christian, we ended the last video with the thought that the Christian must have an attitude to the world which combines both involvement and detachment, to be in the world but not of the world, as the Bible says. Now, this is not so unusual as it sounds. Now, I would think it would be true to say that this combination of involvement and detachment is characteristic of the work of many people. For instance, of the minister and of the doctor. Now, of course, the minister and the doctor must be deeply involved, deeply identified with the people whom they wish to help, but they must at the same time be able to stand back and to view the facts in such a way that their judgment is not clouded by too much sentiment, emotion, too much softness. Sometimes it's necessary to be stern or firm in order to be merciful, and to be hard in order to be kind. Now, this involvement and detachment are characteristics of the Christian's attitude to the world. A Christian should be involved in the world and its life as Jesus was, but at the same time, to the Christian, the world is not everything. It is the threshold to a larger and wider life, which begins when this life ends. In this world, we should live our lives to the full, but always with the conviction that it is something beyond this world which in the end gives this world its value and significance. Let's have a look to see what the New Testament says. And we are at once faced with the fact that the New Testament expects and indeed demands that we should be good citizens. For example, Jesus was ready and willing to pay the temple tax, and that he was willing to pay the temple tax that any Jew had to pay, as we read in Matthew chapter 17, verses 24 to 27. Now, he does not question the fact that a person has a duty to the emperor as well as having a duty to God, and that both must be fulfilled, as we read in Matthew chapter 22, verses 15 to 22. The Apostle Paul was proud to be a Roman citizen and had no hesitation in claiming his rights as a citizen of Rome, as we read in the book of Acts chapter 21, verses 39, and Acts chapter 22, verses 25. In the book of Romans, he writes about the relationship of the Christian to the state, and he is quite clear that the state is a divine institution and that it is a Christian duty to give obedience to it. The magistrate is God's servant, and if a person does the right thing, he has nothing to fear. It is only the criminal and the wrongdoer who have anything of which to be afraid. So the taxes of the state ought to be paid, and the authority of the state ought to be respected, as Paul sees it, as we read in the book of Romans chapter 13, verses 1 to 7. So it's the duty of the Christian to remember in our prayers those who are in charge of public affairs, from the emperor, or we could say today the prime minister, or even the king, downwards, as we read in the book of 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 2. So Peter, the Apostle Peter, is equally sure of the duty of citizenship. Fear God, he says, and honour the emperor, as we read in the book of 1 Peter chapter 2 verse 17. Then all of a sudden in the book of Revelation we get a thunderous about face. For in that book, Rome is the great harlot, drunk with the blood of the saints and the martyrs, as we read in the book of Revelation chapter 17 verses 1 to 7. The Roman Empire for John of Revelation has become the very essence and incarnation of devilish and satanic power. What's happened? Why the difference? Let's have a look, shall we? Well, in the great days of the Roman Empire, Roman justice and Roman impartiality were famous. The people who Rome conquered were not resentful, they were grateful. The seas were cleared of pirates and the roads of brigands. A man might make his journeys in safety and live his life in peace, thanks to what was known as the Pax Romana, or Roman power, in other words, or Roman peace. So quite spontaneously, people began to talk of Roma, which is the spirit of Rome, as something divine. And even as far back as the 2nd century BC, people were building temples for the worship of divine Rome. Now, if things had stopped there might have been no great trouble, but it was the next step that made the difference. It was all very well to worship the spirit of Rome, but after all, the spirit of Rome is an abstraction. It's not a real thing. But that abstraction is incarnated in the emperor. It's given flesh, it's given a body. And bit by bit, the worship came to be transferred to the emperor as the embodiment of Rome. Now, by the early days of the Christian era, temples for the worship of Caesar, the emperor, were quite common. Now, at first, it's true to say the emperors really and truly didn't want this. They were a bit embarrassed with the whole business, but bit by bit, the Roman state began to see a far-reaching use for this Caesar worship. The Roman Empire was a huge area stretching from the Danube in Germany to North Africa and from Great Britain to the Euphrates in the Middle East. It was very difficult to get some focus. One thing which would unify all the many tribes and nations in it. And suddenly the Roman government realized that they had just that in Caesar worship. Now today we can talk about the crown being the one thing that holds the Commonwealth together. And it is just the same as if to unify the Commonwealth we set up a universal worship of King Charles III, for example. So the Roman government laid down that in the end that every citizen should once a year burn a pinch of incense to Caesar and say, Caesar is Lord. And then he would get a certificate to say that he'd done so. Now, to be fair to Rome, after a man had done this, he could go off and worship any god or goddess he liked, so long as the worship did not affect public order or public decency. The worship of Caesar was a test of a man's political loyalty far more than of his religion. But the one thing that the Christians would not say was, Caesar is Lord. For them, Jesus Christ is Lord and no one else. So persecution broke out, and as William Watson the poet wrote, so to the wild wolf hate were hurled, the panting, huddling flock whose crime was Christ. And this is where the book of Revelation comes in. In Paul's time, there was nothing like this, but by the time of the book of Revelation, compulsory Caesar worship was on the way. Now, all this has to be said, for the point is that the Christian is the good citizen, and the Christian is the obedient citizen. But there are limits, and beyond these limits, we will not go. Now, in the Christian life, there is only one supreme loyalty, and that loyalty is to Jesus Christ. And that loyalty takes precedence over loyalty to family, loyalty to state, and loyalty to everything else. So there can come a time when the Christian duty is disobedience to the state, and the Christian must decide that when the time comes, he must act on it. It may not come once in a lifetime, it may not come once in a century, but it can come. And that is something which we cannot forget. So where is our loyalty? Is our loyalty to Jesus Christ, or is it to the state? It's a very interesting question, don't you think? I'm going to leave the video here. In the next video, we're going to be looking at the relationship between the church and the Christian and the state. And we'll see that that relationship has, over the centuries, taken many forms. So I want to thank you for joining me in this video. See you on the next one. Bye-bye.